Well, I would like to talk more on the ILO and its basic points that were accepted by the organization. Um, and well, actually, uh, the new labor market might be considered as a labor market where unions become more dominant and visible, and ground was opened, a space was opened for them. Although the percentages never got, I mean, in United States at least, above 60, 70, 80%. So there was a significant portion of the workforce which was not part of the was not part of the unions, and then the labor standards is the second part, and to some extent those standards started to be developed in the 19th century, but in 20th century, those standards in terms of regulation of labor time also, but also, for example, standards with respect to noise, I mean labor security in many cases also become part of the labor market. So this type of regulation of the labor market by the government and the ability to organize the right given to the workers to organize, they were two sides of the coins of the labor market. But then maybe we had a third side, which is regulated labor mobility. Just like in the United States, in the Europe also, workers from other countries were allowed to work. However, they were accepted as the temporary workers. They are accepted to work in those developed countries and then return back to their countries. In Germany, famously, they were called Gastarbeiters, which is just guest workers, for example. And famously, Turkish citizens have gone there. But some of them in the end stayed there. But in the beginning, the program was built with the intention of getting all of them back to their countries. There are also from other countries, for example, Greece, Italy, some Middle Eastern countries, also Yugoslavia. And this labor force that's coming from the developing countries provided cheap labor force in certain sectors, in some cases in the United States, for example, in agriculture. But in countries like Germany, where, I mean, there was a deficiency of the labor force, they can get to actually many different sectors. Typically, the workers of the citizens of the developed countries usually get jobs with relatively higher status, and this is the workers that are coming from the developing countries. They got relatively jobs with lower status. Still, their conditions might be better than the conditions in their own country. I mean, in terms of at least payments and maybe also labor standards, I mean, the working conditions. Not even these ideas were actually challenged. In these ideas that labor is not a commodity, and the labor organization and the state intervention to raise the labor standards. Those words, those ideas might maybe seem uncontroversial when you look, but in some cases it might also, in some ways it might also, you might see the controversies they might bring in later. Especially labor is not a commodity idea. I mean, what does it mean? It means this. When I'm talking on a typical commodity, for example, this pen, if it is not needed, I might allow the price of this pen to fall down, and I don't need to regulate the way I use this pen. I might use this pen by just, I don't know, hit this pen to this book just disintegrated, or use it for 24 hours, destroy it in one day while using it. I can treat commodity any way I like, but labor is not like that according to this idea. I mean, labor is not something which could be allowed to take any price, because for many people the price of their labor power is in the end determines their living standards and whether they will be able to live above the poverty or not. Also, labor should not be allowed to be treated like any commodity anyway its buyer wants. So what the buyer can do with the labor power it buys and how it can use it should be regulated. I mean, it should not be something that should be left to the market, and especially to the buyer of the labor power should not be able to decide should have the ability to do anything he or she wants with that labor of the person from whom he buy that labor power. And that raises also an interesting question. I mean, if you hire someone for any kind of job, that job should be defined in that, according to this view. I mean, it should not be it should not be like you pay that money to the person and now you should be able to do let that person do anything he or she anything you want. Of course, the counter idea could be, well, in that case, there is no flexibility. I mean, if I be very specific on what the person I'm hiring can do, in that case, I mean, there is a need for a different type of job, but no need for the job that is explicitly defined in the contract. In that case, I cannot move the worker from one job to another job. Of course, the definitions could be made more flexible, but still, I mean, for any type of flexible definition, this question might stay. But on the other hand, again, the workers should be able to set the limits of what he or she can do for that money. So the discussion is there. But you can see, I mean, why this idea of labor is not a commodity is stated by a law was not that much obvious and also challenged later. We will see how it was challenged in academia and by the later economic developments also later. So now we can move to the developing world, and one of the main aspects of the developments of this developing world was, not for all of it, there were some independent countries, especially Latin America was all developed world, but it was consists of independent countries. But in Africa and Asia, a significant number of countries have been colonies of the developed world. Now, after 1945, a slow, painful process of decolonization started to take place. This decolonization process was supported by the Soviet Union and the United States. Both think that the people of the country should have right to determine how the country will be run. Although, according to Soviet ideology, the democracy in the way it is understood by the United States, according to the most mainstream understanding of democracy, at least, was not, according to the Soviet Union, the only way people might decide the fate of their countries. But anyway, one way or the other, both the United States and the Soviet Union were thinking people of a country should be able to decide the fate of their country. The developed countries of the Western Europe, basically, did not accept this easily. Even after World War II, where basically this idea of superiority of certain states to others was challenged significantly. Part of their claim was some countries were not ready to govern themselves, but throughout a painful process, one by one, different countries start to get their independence. And in 1960, many of the major previous colonies get their independence. Not all, some still are not fully independent, like Puerto Rico of the United States. Puerto Rico is kind of still like a semi-colony of the United States. It's protected. It has some independence by itself, but it is still connected administratively to the United States. And it doesn't have any power to elect U.S. president, so it is pretty much a colony. Motherland relation to some extent still is maintained. It is not a low-income country. It is better than most of the. I think maybe we should look to recent data, but it might be even better than all Latin American countries. However, it is also worse than all U.S. states, as far as I know. Again, we should look to the recent data, but the living standards there were, at least last time I have looked, worse than all states in the United States. And basically, this decolonization process was the way in traditional sense South-North relations were formed. Naming it South-North is a little bit tricky because, I mean, Australia is in the south, South Africa is in the south. I mean, to some extent, I mean, you don't necessarily get completely into more developed countries when you move from north to south, but roughly it might hold. It's okay. And because roughly it holds, this term sticked for north as a term for developed countries and south for the term for the developing countries. So the main point was, after decolonization, the southern countries did not want northern countries to intervene and make decisions for those countries, to develop those countries. I mean, how those countries will become developed, become high-income countries, how they become better countries, they should be decided by the people of those countries. They should not be decided by the developed countries. So developed countries should not basically act for these countries in a paternalistic way and tell them what they should do or force them to do certain things in the name of benefiting them. That was actually, there's actually a resolution in the United States called Decolonization Act accepted exactly on these lines. And that act itself also, says the same thing, and basically that act also had kind of was not that much received that much pleasantly by the United States also, because the United States, although it supported the independence of the countries, it still had considered to have some right on to comment on how those countries should act, basically. And then you have the development question. The development question is these countries, these former colonies, and other developing countries, they were relatively low-income countries. How to improve the economic system of these countries and increase the living standards of these countries to the extent they become developed countries. Countries with low or no poverty rate might be the way we define developed countries. So this was a major question, and we will see how this question was initially answered by these developing countries of the world. I mean, quick, sneak, import, substitution, industrialization. will be the answer. Anyway, see you in the next part.